Welcome to On the Table, a podcast about board games, card games, and tabletop war games. Hey, it's Chase from On the Table Gaming, and welcome back to episode 95 of the On the Table Gaming podcast. And this week I'm joined by Brian from Big Top Gaming to discuss the recently revealed A Song of Ice and Fire team tournament guidelines for 2021. Brian, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. How you been doing lately?
I've been doing pretty well, all things considered. It's been an interesting year, to say the least.
Yeah, so 95, huh? I wonder, do you have anything special in your pocket for episode 100?
I don't know if I can reveal that at this time here, so... But, as far as the way things are going, people might be remembering that, 2020 was supposed to be the big reveal for organized play for A Song of Ice and Fire, but it probably goes without saying, this was a suboptimal year for, conventions and tournament play. So it's cool that they're teasing this document now, right? We're getting kind of a little bit of a teaser for what 2021 might look like.
Yeah, we can at least exist in the headspace of what a tournament like this would look like and start teasing apart like what the best strategies would be when kind of attacking this type of event. I'm really excited about it. I think when it comes to any kind of miniature war game, I feel like one of the most, not pure, maybe it's the most pure and fun experience is having a team event, because you get to have this like cool sense of camaraderie. Like if I go to a regular tournament with like 5 people, right, that I pack them in my car and we go, we're not really all like kind of fighting towards the same goal, and there's a good chance we might get paired against each other, and it always sucks to get paired against your car mates in round one, because someone's going to walk away from that game not happy. In terms of like advancing in the tournament structure. But at a team tournament, you get to all work towards the same goal. And I'm super happy that Cool Mini or Not has put out a packet that kind of gives us some guidelines around that, instead of making the community of A Song of Ice and Fire build it themselves.
Right. Absolutely. But before we get into that, what's been going on your end?
Not much really. I mean, like I'm still super into the Baratheon stuff right now. Like I haven't completely abandoned the free folk world. It's just that now that the Baratheon stuff is getting a lot more fleshed out, I'm really enjoying a lot of what they do, since I kind of live for the grind when it comes to my like play style in miniature wargaming. So the Baratheons are really kind of striking a lot of those boxes. Of course, Renly for sure. In terms of content production, I know that the pandemic's really affected my ability to get interactions with A Song of Ice and Fire players in my local community, and that's kind of stymied the battle report system, or the battle report production on my side. Mm-hmm. But definitely I'm waiting for the massive release cycle in November to start talking about what do all the attachment boxes bring to your building logic, and then we can start talking about some of those other new releases. I think I jumped the gun a little bit with some of those Targaryen releases that kind of got teased on accident, but there's a lot of real cool, exciting things to talk about in A Song of Ice and Fire. I'm just kind of like biding my time for those, but otherwise we're still doing a lot of War Machine stuff. I think I might start dabbling into the 40K world a little bit, since that's like kind of bit me. Yeah, I know it's weird. Like my wargaming like career kind of started with Warhammer 40K, like most people's, and it's like Warhammer is just that siren that's kind of calling to you from the shoreline every time a new edition gets.
Yep.
And they're really focusing. One of the things that really attracted me to other games when I had left 40K in the first place was that this idea of scenario play, and A Song of Ice and Fire has that in spades, along with War Machine and some others. So now that Games Workshop's kind of coming back around to that kind of style of play, it's gotten really exciting, and the games have been really cool and dynamic, and not just like my 48-inch gun shoots you off the table before you can do anything and I win.
And I mean, the miniatures look great for 40K as well, so there's always that like coolness factor as well.
Yeah, much like Cool Mini or Not, they seem GW always kind of ups the bar as they produce more models. So there's some misses every now and again, but I was recently looking at some of their Sisters of Battle stuff, and it was funny because the Sister Dialogus was always like the most awkward miniature in all of Warhammer 40K, and they ended up making a new sculpt of it that does not look awkward. So it's neat that they're going back and kind of fixing some of those. But even just with the way the attachment boxes are looking for A Song of Ice and Fire, we're definitely seeing that Cool Mini or Not is increasing the quality and detail with every single release that they're getting. So when November hits, with all the way these things are looking, I can't wait to see what comes in the future.
Oh man, and Greyjoys, those sculpts look so amazing.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm kind of chomping at the bit for.
Yeah, I want to try them out too. So what we have here then in this team tournament guidelines is that it's going to allow you to show up at an event, like Brian was saying, and you'll be playing with a group of people as like a unified team. So it might be your 4 people against another 4 people, and we don't mean like playing on the table at the same time. It's not like 2v2s, but there's a pairing and selection process where you're kind of like maybe not bidding, but you're strategically teaming up certain players to play against each other to maybe get the most advantage. And so there's like kind of a pairing process we want to talk through. But before we get to that, even right from the start, the way you build your armies is going to be different in this format. So the guidelines is everybody's going to show up with 2 lists, and you can't change the list once the tournament begins. So kind of standard tournament fare there. But
for what it's worth, the 2 list is optional. I'll just put that in there because you don't have to take 2 lists. It's just you're way better off for taking 2 of them.
Fair enough. That makes sense. And the thing is, though, on your team, members of the same team cannot play the same faction, and each neutral character can only be included in the list of 1 player unless you have someone playing the neutral faction. And if they're playing the neutral faction, that doesn't count towards the limit. So they can have a duplicate of a character in their army still. This is really cool. This is going to really shake things up a lot. What are your thoughts on how this might play out?
So I think one of the coolest parts about this, first of all, I guess there's a lot of cool parts about this, because not being able to echo factions across multiple players is a really big deal. I think that means that bringing a more diverse team is going to be more important. I think it's going to be a much more stressful thing to execute properly in the 4-player version as opposed to the 3-player version. Mm-hmm. But making sure that you have multiple people who are specialists within different factions can be really huge here. The neutral thing is really massive. I think that in the headspace of A Song of Ice and Fire, I think that many people feel that the neutral faction itself is maybe a couple notches down from the rest. I wouldn't say that it's like bottom of the barrel by any means. And even so, if the bottom of the barrel is neutrals, it's not like they're that far from everyone else. Mm-hmm. But it means that you're incentivized to kind of bring one of those players if there's a lot of power contained within some of those neutral characters. Like, we've all known that Walder Frey's a really big deal in most cases. A lot of those combat characters that kind of turn you up, like Braun is kind of a big one. Brienne is a little bit on the big side, although I think she's probably bigger in my head than what most people would think. I just really enjoy her deployment shenanigans. But as an aside, I don't want to go too far off into that one, but I think that it means that if you have a player who is well versed in the neutral playability and can execute their game plan on the table really well, they're going to be a super powerful asset to make sure that you can wrap that into your play style to give you some really cool advantages. Like the really cool thing here is that it does allow you to double run commanders. So if there's one neutral commander that's really powerful, you can kind of echo that twice across your army or across your player list, right? So like if Roose Bolton is just really, if you've got 2 really strong Roose players, you can have some Roose player in Lannister and then Roose player in neutral, and then you can capitalize on how much you can control the pairing process with having 2 Rooses.
So I think we're going to see, I mean, that's a huge boost for neutral players. I mean, I feel like they're going to be in way more demand. I mean, Mike from Off the Wall Games, if you're listening, you're going to be, get your phone ready. People are going to be reaching out to you all the time. Those people who've been like diehard neutrals from the beginning.
Yeah, they're going to kind of have to set up a table, right? And put a sign on it that says accepting applications for team membership.
There we go. That can be his side hustle. He can just show up at tournaments and be like, hire a neutral player to round out your team.
The first thing you just say is, so what can you do for me? You get
our blades are sharp.
Exercise that hired out neutral feel.
Oh my gosh. That's hilarious, because that is thematic on like a whole nother level.
Exactly. Yep. I think it brings a lot of value to a neutral specialist. I think they'll find a lot of benefit in this type of tournament setup.
And for the record, that would never be me. I probably have played neutrals, straight neutrals, like the least, especially with like no coin beyond the wall being a free folk thing. Not really my wheelhouse. I think I get teased. I know Chanel's teased me in the past for being like, oh yeah, they don't have any options for this. And he's like, Chase, they can take neutrals. And it's like, oh yeah.
Yeah, it's tough to remember that. I was a free folk purist for a really long time, and at least now it definitely gives those people who have been neutral purists a really neat way to kind of integrate into this process.
And so you then sit down with your team, you'll build out your list, making sure that you're not kind of duplicating these neutral characters, within these guidelines. And then when you actually get to the event, there's two ways of pairing the players. So it depends if you have 3-player teams or 4-player teams. Maybe you've got a little bit of experience in this format in a slightly different incarnation. Do you think maybe you could walk us through? So what's sort of the strengths of this model, and how does it really work? How does it play out?
So the really interesting thing about team formats is that it allows you to kind of construct your team setup first. You want to put a lot of effort into making sure that your team's bringing lists that all kind of not synergize so well with each other, and more so that they kind of don't have the same bad matchups. So if you're someone like and I'm just going to throw this out here as like, a possibility, right? If you're a Lannister player, right? Maybe you might struggle into something like Free Folk a little bit more because your units are typically a little bit more pricey, at least the ones that you're taking, and you play a more control-oriented style, which Free Folk doesn't really care about that. If you want to control one of my 6 Free Folk raiders, it's not a big deal. So that Free Folk pocket is going to be looked at as somewhat of a weakness for you. So instead, you can try and dodge that matchup and have one of your other teammates take it. Because if you're taking someone like a Stark player who has really fast, hard-hitting cavalry that can kind of hit in and back out and not worry about getting gummed up with the free folk stuff, or a Baratheon player who can just exist and tank through all of this free folk stuff that's going on, you kind of don't have to deal with that so much because of the way that they set this pairing process up. So this way you can kind of bring a list or bring a faction that is one that might struggle into the big headspace meta and have options to kind of dodge those matchups. I think that the team format allows you to really kind of tailor how things work in terms of the pairing process. You kind of pick and choose what you get to play into. Now, you don't 100% get to pick and choose it because of the way these are formatted, but there's definitely a little bit more control, so you can bring something that the rest of the community might not think is extremely powerful in like a 1v1 format, our traditional tournament styles, but you can start bringing things that are a little bit more, they would be more present in the meta if their boogeyman weren't as present in the meta as they are.
This is really going to shake things up then.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that it'll allow people to get a lot of things on the table that they have been kind of afraid to put on in a competitive mindset. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this shakes up and see how the competitive Ice and Fire world reacts to it.
So I show up with my team of 3, me and 2 others, and we get paired up against this other team of 3 people. So each team would choose a lord. So one person that's kind of like the team captain. The other 2 players would be bannermen.
I remember in Magic, they used to have the generals format where it was 3 people. You'd have your generals and your 2 lieutenants. So your lord's kind of like the ever-present, what that matchup's going to be.
And then each team's going to reveal which player is their lord for the round of this tournament. And then each player chooses one bannerman on the opposite team. So each team would select one person on their team, and the other 2 bannermen would be paired off.
Yeah, I believe you've got the gist of it. So this kind of the 3-player team format kind of lends itself a little bit more to like building 3 people with all comers pairings. So like I'm going to kind of talk about these in just the aspect of bringing 2 lists, because if you want to bring one list to a tournament, that's completely within your right and ability to do, but you're 100% going to be hindering yourself, because if you play against someone who has a second list, they're 100% going to know which one of their lists is going to be best at taking yours apart, and there's nothing you can do about it. So in a 2-list pairing format, you can do things like look at my 2-list. It's really difficult to build an extremely effective 2-list pair and cover every single matchup you need to. It's just difficult. And then when you get into the process of like list chicken, where if I drop my list A, then you drop your list B, it's a good game. But if I drop list A and you drop list A, then it's not a good game. You know, like there's a whole other level to screwballiness when you start bringing that into consideration. So by having this format set up, you could take someone who has the best all-comer pairing between all three of your opponents, right? And then if you select them as the Lord, it means that no matter what player from the opposite team gets selected as Lord, you're going to have a good game into them, and you can kind of manufacture it to where you never really have a list chicken matchup, or you're going to be dropping a list that isn't going to be effective into what they do.
Okay.
It really kind of gears people towards building, like I said, more all-comer pairings, and this way they can kind of dodge matchups. And when I say dodge matchups, I mean this way they can kind of make sure that they don't get put into a matchup that they don't want. And by committing them to Bannerman, you can kind of choose like, okay, so I have my best all-comer pairing between Night's Watch. So I'm going to play as the Lord. So no matter what my opponent drops, if they're Targaryen, Lannister, or Stark, I will have an extremely decent matchup into either one of those pairings, no matter what. There's no blank spaces for me in those people. So me choosing myself as the Lord means that I'm setting myself up for a good match, right? And
now,
then
do you think there are certain factions we have now that like lend themselves more toward that Lord position? Like, I keep thinking about Baratheons and not having had much tournament experience with them because of the two parts of their faction, the kind of diversity you could have in building your lists, even with limited options. Like, maybe they be a good all-comer, or are there other lists you might be looking at other factions?
I really do feel like Baratheons and Starks kind of lend themselves to being the all-comer factions. Baratheons end up skewing accidentally in a really big direction. So most of their stuff, if whether you're playing Renly or Stannis loyalty, most of it is extremely durable. So you kind of get your opponent into this position where because you're Baratheon, they have to drop a list that's good at breaking armor, but not all lists that are good at breaking armor are also good into like the panic game. So if they end up presenting a pair that's kind of susceptible to that panic game that Stannis can play, you can really kind of flip the table on them and make sure that they say, yes, you have to deal with Baratheon Wardens or Champions of the Stag or whatever. But if they end up dropping that, like Sworn Brothers are maybe a decent one for it, but they also don't have the greatest morale in the world when you start taking a lot off of it. So if they're not playing something like Jon Snow, who's really good at making sure the morale stays good and brings a lot of dudes back, you could definitely see that like hole in their pairing and kind of exploit it. So I feel like Baratheons do a good job at that, and I think Starks are really, in my opinion, I think Starks play their own game kind of regardless of what the opponent's doing. They're a very proactive faction, so they don't need to really do things like counter what your opponent's doing. They find the troublesome parts in a list, scalpel it out, and move on.
Yeah.
So it's really easy for them to kind of attack their game plan at the start. So like finding a Lord who's a good Baratheon and Stark player probably is going to be one you'll find more often being able to take that position than not.
And then you've had experience in this style of play in other game systems, right?
Yeah, I think War Machine and Infinity both use this team pairing style quite a bit. I know in War Machine, it's a 5-man pair or 5-player pairing is usually the one that kind of gets utilized a bunch. And there's a lot of discussion in how the pairings get set up, because there are just some times where you don't want to go into a certain faction, right? And with the 5-person pairing, you can kind of dodge that matchup. And I think that's again the same thing you can do here. It's just in the 3-man, it's kind of like, or the 3-player version, it's a little bit more, whoever is best at going into something is the one you put up first, and then you just kind of hope for a good matchup with the other two.
So then the other option is the 4-player teams. And this one's a little bit more involved, trying to read through it. And I was trying to wrap my head around it at first. And I'm glad that I've got you on here who's a little bit more of a pro at this. I haven't had a lot of, team player experience like this, but it's a little bit more involved with the 4-player teams.
Yeah, you get a lot more control on what you can do here. So you end up still choosing a Lord, and then the other 3 players on your team become Bannermen. And then each team reveals who their Lord is for that round. So again, we're getting back to this idea that wasn't so much highlighted in the 3-player version, but Lords are changed per round. So you don't have to do this at the beginning of the tournament and just assign someone lordship, right? You can kind of pick and choose. So in that case where like Baratheon and Starks are really high all comers, if there's anything that those players feel between their pairing that they just don't quite hit on the faction level or on the commander level, they can say, I need to pivot off of this for Lord for the turn and put in our other player that's either Baratheon or Stark, right? Depending on what their opposite is. And then they might have that better option as a Lord so they can get paired into whatever that person decides to present. Once you've chosen the Lords, you kind of they call it you determine which team gets the toss, which I imagine is just like a roll off or a coin flip for who becomes team A and who becomes team B. So once you've figured out who team A is, the team A chooses 2 of their bannermen. So they'll have one player that's kind of benched that doesn't go into this pairing process. And then team A will present those 2 bannermen. So they do something like maybe present their Lannister and Free Folk player, right? And then team B gets to choose one of the bannermen that they have. So they've got 3 bannermen left waiting in the wings. And then they can kind of pick out which one of those is going to go best into those 2 pairings. So I think when you get to this point in the selection process, if I were the team A player, I would probably put my most 2 polarizing faction list constructions onto this matchup so that the player on team B wouldn't be able to figure out a really good matchup that would catch both of them. I want to present them 2 very different options. I could see something like dropping my Baratheon player and my Free Folk player, because those two lists, regardless, take very different tools to deal with. So then once they they have their whole set of 3 bannermen to choose from. So they pick the one that might go best into those pairings, and then that they get matched up that way. So then from there, we have one person or one bannerman left over from team A, and we have 2 bannermen left over from team B. So then team B puts those 2 bannermen out, and then team A gets to choose which one of those 2 bannermen from team B play against their one leftover bannerman from team A. I know that you might need like your chalkboard with like
at home we were following along,
yarn and everything to keep up with this. But then as the team A player, I get to choose which person from team A goes into those 2 represented bannermen from team B. And since I've kind of knocked out one of their power players, like not so much power player, but they pointed a certain player into that original pairing from team A, now I feel like I get a little bit more choice in making sure that I'm not picking a bad matchup for both of my bannermen. Because once I've decided to put one of my remaining team A player into the 2 remaining team B bannermen, that leaves me with my one leftover bannerman that's been benched and the one leftover bannerman from B that's still on the table. So I kind of get to dictate 2 matchups, and I think there's a lot of power with that in team A. And then, of course, once that's over, there's the 2 lords that play against each other, and the lords would be probably the best well-rounded players that are less affected by extreme variance in list building style.
Okay, so that actually makes a lot more sense to me now. But one of the questions I had originally was, so it seems like there's a possibility here that, that A player or B, the A team or the B team, there might be kind of some built-in inherent strengths for that, because one is choosing first or gets the last choice. But within here, when the player from team A, first chooses, but built in when the team B chooses at that first round, team A gets to choose their deployment zone or pass it. And then team B then gets to choose the deployment zone or pass it for the next 3 options. So it seems like maybe that's built in there to balance out the selection process.
Exactly, because I think that in general, when I'm thinking about this pairing process and how the matrix of it goes down or the algorithm of it goes down, I feel like without choosing deployment zones, that team A is extremely advantaged because they get to control 2 of those matchups. And I know that like the team like kind of get to choose 3 of those matchups, right? Because they're a lord. It's almost like both players kind of have an equal choice, but I think there's a lot of power in being able to bench one of your players or one of your bannermen right away and not have to worry about that matchup not being something that you don't get a good one out of. You know what I mean? Like you can take your weakest player based on all 4 or all 3 options that your opponents presented and just say, okay, well, we want to make sure we hold you to the end so you don't get the bad matchup.
Oh man, this is really fascinating.
Yeah, it's really cool stuff. I think the one thing that I want to comment on about the deployment stuff or choosing sides is that I feel like with the way that terrain setup in a Song of Ice and Fire goes, the deployment side isn't as impactful when you're allowing players to choose the terrain they want to put on the table and where it goes. I feel like one of the big benefits to having this pairing process or this team process is that the tournament organizer should really be going out to each table and presetting all of the terrain that's on there, because this gives another layer to figuring out which table do I want to put my first matchup on, and that could just be another layer that gets baked into the team A B process. Because if team A gets to choose, whoever picks the pairing, right? If they get to choose which table they get to play on, they can kind of manipulate their choice based on what the terrain looks like already. And then the deployment zone matters quite a bit too, because if you're a decent TO and setting it up so that one side is just slightly more advantaged than the other, or there's a definite downside to picking one side over the other, it gives a lot more levity to the choice for picking deployment. So I think the other thing on top of this too is that if you're running a team tournament, it's going to take a lot of time to let players go through this pairing process and then set up terrain on the table. So you really be setting the terrain pre-game and then making sure that it's kind of not getting reset but put back where it should have been after each round. And that'll just add another cool layer to the complexity or the excitement of kind of picking through this process.
Man, I just think this is going to set us up to be in a position to have some really, really cool and dynamic and just like engaging events.
And we're going to see a lot of different lists too, because there's some things that people might just not be really down with doing right now because of the way that the tournaments or the meta is kind of shaking out, at least as far as what a meta we have right now, with online being the only way we engage in it. But I think neutrals in general kind of really suffer from a panic heavy meta when that happens. Like, I think even just the existence of Melisandre and all of the panic stuff from the Baratheon side or the Stannis side of Baratheons kind of scares them away. So in this scenario, I could sit there and say, okay, there's one Baratheon player and one Lannister player on my opponent's team. I'm going to bench my neutral player to make sure I give them the best matchup possible at the end so they can try and dodge all of these panic games.
Man, and so this is kind of just like a teaser here. Part of me in my head, it's like my headcanon is like the organized play team. I mean, I feel so bad for those guys. They've had all this work, all this stuff they were building up for. And obviously, CMon Expo came and went and they were not able to really showcase anything. That all kind of got pushed back. But in my head, they're like slowly teasing this stuff out just to be like, hey, look, we have all this cool stuff coming.
Yeah, this is a really big deal for games in general. I think a lot of times in games when we see these kind of events or this format being created, it's almost 100% player generated. Like Privateer Press, Games Workshop, Corvus Belly, they don't manufacture these formats. And since Cool Mini or Not's kind of getting ahead of the ball and dropping these formats before players start to develop them and kind of run away with their own formats without Cool Mini or Not's input, I think it really is a big testament to say where Cool Mini or Not wants the game to go. And if any player ever had a question about the longevity of this game or the shelf life of this game, I think any of those concerns could be dashed, and that Cool Mini or Not's really doing a lot to kind of make sure that we get these cool, exciting, and innovative formats to continue the competitive side of the game. And even though I say competitive and a lot of that twists a lot of players' guts sometimes, team formats are probably the best casual players' entrance into a competitive environment, because most people are just kind of going here to have fun. And at the worst case scenario, you're going to have one bad game where someone smokes you because they're really hyper competitive, and then the rest of your day is super fun.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for my buddy Brian without him here, but he got into War Machine, and we both did. But I petered out a bit and was more into Song, but he kept going with it. And I remember him talking about playing some tournaments and then going up to his first team tournament and being like, "Oh my gosh, it's amazing!" And like he was just super thrilled about it. And I could just tell the way he was talking about it, like the energy and the excitement, and like, I don't know. So I'm like, I'm excited to experience that myself.
Yeah, the dynamics of the game changed so much, because it's not just, there's kind of like this pre-game discussion that happens that you don't really get in a normal standard tournament process, where you get to kind of really think about with your group what's going to work well. So if you're a person who's like really shy about bringing a 2-list pairing, you end up having 3 other people, 2 to 3 other people that can help you talk through your pairing process and say, well, I know you haven't played against this particular list or this commander a bunch, but here's what it does, and this is what it would do to your army. So when you're talking about what do I do during my pairing process, what list do I drop, your other players can kind of be used as a support structure to make sure that you have the best game possible, instead of you just kind of blindly going into it and not understanding what you're supposed to do in that matchup.
Right. Man,
There's
I'm
there's so much
excited.
to
Like
it.
I'm already just like eager to try this out. I know I gotta be a little bit patient, but it gives me definitely something to start thinking about and look forward to.
Yeah, I know that when life kind of develops in a way where the pandemic isn't super prevalent anymore, I think the first time this ever happens, this team format, there's going to be a resounding response from the community that really says like this is probably like the most pure way to play A Song of Ice and Fire.
Oh man, I hope so. I hope so. And I know there are some tournaments going on now that are starting up again out in Gamers Haven in Parma Heights, Ohio. November 7th is going to be a big tournament. It's capped due to COVID restrictions, not to interest. But I think they've got like a 24-person tournament going there. That was Bob and Max, who were on a previous podcast for us. Night's Watch Bob. Maybe someday he'll convert to free folk. So I know people are starting to get back into tournaments, and maybe we'll see some people testing this out, in smaller communities before 2021.
Yeah, I think it'll definitely be a toughie, because the one thing that you absolutely need for one of these tournaments is space, right? Because
Mm.
I know that in some of the War Machine tournaments that I've played in like this, they garner a lot of interest, because you are, taking your 1v1 format of competitive play in A Song of Ice and Fire definitely turns a lot of people off. But we had an event that was kind of born and bred in Wisconsin for the America's team championship. And we had pulled people from all over the continent. Like, we had Canadians coming down to Wisconsin. We had people from Arkansas coming up. There's so many different people coming to kind of bring together at this event. And some of them were extremely competitive, but a lot of them were really just like, we're here to have fun and just play with our friends, because it really does give you that sense of camaraderie where everyone's working towards that same goal. And it's just a really exciting and fun way to interact with the game. And I'm really interested to see how the A Song of Ice and Fire community adopts this format and kind of puts it I'm hoping that it becomes the forefront of A Song of Ice and Fire organized play.
Well, I will certainly be picking your brain about this, because I know you have a wealth of knowledge about this format and A Song of Ice and Fire. I feel like it's like a misnomer to have it be like Big Top Gaming. It should be like Big Brain Gaming or something. But I'm looking forward to sending you a message and be like, what do you think about this? Or what do you think of a team of this composition? But I guess it's like endless though, right? Because it all depends on who you're matching up with. And oh,
Yeah, there's just a whole nother layer to figuring this out. So it's just, again, not to sound like a broken record, but it really does appeal to a lot of people, where like the non-competitive people or the more casual people, they can sit there and just like bring what they want to and hang out with their friends and have a good time working towards the same goal. Everyone's victory, the team's victory is a shared victory. And even if you lose, it's not always the worst, because that's one thing we didn't go over, is like the idea of jumping on a grenade, right? So like, if you're a player who's like, okay, everyone on my team is really garbage into for whatever reason, Lannister players. So I'm going to take the player that's probably like a little more practiced into that, probably doesn't have the greatest matchup in the universe, but I'm going to throw them into that one because I'm expecting them to lose in order to help bolster my other players' percentage of winning, because we're all just bad into Lannister.
man, that's so cool. Yeah, man, I'm going to start thinking about this already. I'm going to start making some lists and talk to some buddies. And oh man, yeah. And so now the big thing is, this was just essentially a preview of things to come. And so, people out there, remember, there's a whole organized play, I don't know what to call it, thing.
Almost experience, right?
Experience being developed. And they had a group of people working on this. And this isn't it, right? Here's a document in advance of like just kind of a preview of some of the things for 2021. And Oh man, I'm so excited. Like
Yeah, it's kinda
talk about a big month. This we're having so much stuff coming out soon.
it's
Oh,
so interesting to think that this is the thing one of the big things they've decided to preview is, like, the first initiative towards their competitive play, campaign, right? Because, like, in my opinion, I feel like this is the pinnacle, like, this is the mountaintop, this is the very tippy top of the great of the wall, right?
I know.
And from here, I only can imagine it going up, and it's just so hard to think of because this is such a huge, fun thing, and I know that a lot of players might be intimidated by it, but there's just so much you can engage in with this format. It's a really exciting time.
And it just, and not that there was ever any doubt, but it's like such a clear indicator that cmon really does have a plan and they're working towards it and, they've got this.
Exactly. I think there's a lot of momentum with the developers too, where in the past, some of Cool Mini or Not's competitive games have kind of fallen by the wayside for one reason or another. But like A Song of Ice and Fire is still clipping along, and it's a lot of the community that keeps their motivation up. And when they put this stuff out, it brings our motivation up to play,
Yeah,
and it just kind of keeps on building and building and building to this massive crescendo where we're just going to be like, organized play is so awesome, and this is one of the best games you can find on the market.
I do feel like the first time we try and facilitate something like this locally, though, I'm going to be like, okay, wait a second. If A chooses B, and if B chooses, I'd be like, it's like some sort of like math equation where I'm like, well, okay, so now there's 2 to 2. But hopefully there'll be someone locally who can help guide me through this. It's pretty simple to document,
Yeah,
but
the always sunny memes keep popping up in my. But, yeah, the first time I went to a team event like this where we had to choose player setups, there's always the person we'd elect as the captain who was kind of like the main decision maker,
Mhm.
and that's usually the most experienced or the one who kind of understands every aspect of everything in the game a little bit better, and those are the people you really want kinda spearheading things, and they can kind of start asking the questions to their other players to say, "Okay, well, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think about this, given your, skill level and how you've interacted with other lists like this in the past?" And as long as you have someone kind of facilitating that discussion, it's really easy to kind of watch this system kind of unfold in front of you. And the more you engage in it, the more you understand it. I know there's a lot of team A and B back and forth, and this
Yeah.
bannerman and that bannerman gets eliminated, and then you've got this bannerman, and it sounds really confusing and chewy. But like once you go through it the first time, it's all downhill from there, and you understand it.
Oh man, I'm so excited. I mean, from my background, I've mentioned maybe on here. So my background is in combat sports originally, and I stopped that to do this sort of stuff. And I really enjoyed like team sports that are like nested in individual sports where you're kind of like all working together, but then you go out there and you perform on your own, and then you kind of come back to the group. And I'm just excited to have this sort of experience brought into tabletop wargaming.
Yeah, there's the other cool thing about this too that is kind of hidden sometimes when we play is that sometimes you might do one of those like kind of pitching someone to a bad matchup, and then they might actually learn that that's not really that bad of a matchup.
Yeah.
They might actually pull that out, and then like there's always the nail biting, and it's not so much in the 4 player team format because there's not enough players to make it where like 2 people from the team have lost and 2 people from the team have won, and then there's that one matchup where you're all just like biting your nails in excitement and anticipation. Whereas in a normal team, we're in a normal format for like the 1v1 competitive play, you really don't care if there's only one person left playing their game. You kind of just want them to be done to move on, but there's just so much involvement and excitement and figuring out like
Oh,
what's
that's
going
so
to happen.
true. Yeah. That's
The
just gonna
one
make the actual event so much better.
Yeah, it's kinda the reason why I think, at first, I was not a super huge fan of the way that Cool Mini or Not scores their rounds, but, in this one, since 2 players from Team A could win and 2 players could lose, there's not a definitive winner from the round until you start looking at some of these tournament points, like the team points and secondary
Mhm.
points and tertiary points. So I really am a little bit more appreciative of the point system that Cool Mini or Not has, whereas previously I was very much not when it was just the 1 player format.
I feel like this is like another one of those moments I've had where it's like kind of like that parable of like the blind man and the elephant, where like each thing is like looking at one small piece and being like, oh, an elephant is like a tree trunk, or like, oh, an elephant is like a giant fan, or like a giant noodle. You get the idea. But it's but like we don't see the whole picture, right?
Exactly. This is kind of exploring why Cool Mini or Not set things the way up up the way they did, when in the beginning, when I first saw those things, I was just like, this is just not functional.
So what we've been is basically in like a gap year. Like 2020 as a year kind of didn't shape up in this entire plan. And so maybe because it was a little bit of an off year, it felt a little bit different. And, obviously the pandemic stuff, but like, oh, we're kind of just waiting to fill that gap in, like where we maybe would have been, 7 months ago if things hadn't picked up and we had this maybe announced at CMon Expo. Like, I think it was smart for them to wait, to be honest.
Yeah, I think so too, because the miniature wargaming world in general kind of moves really, really fast. And every single company that's out there, they want your money, right? Like,
Right.
so they're going to do everything they can to try and make sure that happens. So I know that the releases, both information and model wise for Cool Mini or Not, have kind of slowed down with pandemic stuff in the past, but it's only done enough. The only thing it's done is really help build up this pressure, right, of the content drop, where they're going to start blowing all this stuff up on us, and it's going to keep every player really excited and interested again, so we don't start pulling away and just say, oh, I'll buy my one box a month or whatever, and move on with my life. And then when things are, you know functional to where I can go out again, I'll pick it up when I pick it up. This way we can kind of keep that excitement drumming up, and we'll all be like really kind of foaming at the mouth to get this team format on the table with all of our 5 million attachments. God, November is going to be a wallet busting month.
Yeah. Yeah. So, no, wrapping things up here, you are a veteran war gamer. You have a wealth of knowledge, obviously very well spoken, and a lot of times people play like a few games, right? You have like an A and a B game, or two games maybe you really enjoy, and so you do a ton of awesome A Song of Ice and Fire content, but also War Machine. So, if people want to find more of your Song of Ice and Fire or War Machine content, where should they be heading?
Well, right now I have the Facebook page for Big Top Gaming, and I'm not always the biggest interaction person when it comes to online or social media content. Like I have a Twitter for Big Top Gaming that maybe has like 3 followers because I barely do anything on it. But Facebook is where I end up posting a lot of the videos that we end up putting out through YouTube, which is just on Big Top Gaming. And then I end up broadcasting that out to any of the pertinent groups that content applies to. And I always share it on the main Facebook pages. And I also end up hitting up some things on Reddit. But for the most part, if you find me on YouTube, like and subscribe to the channel, and you'll be able to keep up with everything that I put out for it, which for right now has kind of been in a downturn. But as soon as that November attachment box drop starts happening, I think things are going to pick up quite a bit.
Yeah, man. Oh, and you've always done great content, and it's always great talking to you. And thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me here. I was really stoked to discuss this new format.
Oh man, I feel like I learned so much, and so thank you for helping facilitate that. And if you're listening, make sure you check out Brian's content over at Big Top Gaming. And in the meantime, we hope you get your miniatures on the table.